Hello, readers! Imagine if Indiana Jones had a sweet tooth, a killer Pac-Man score, and a cousin who could roast you into next week. That's Corey Crumbly. He's 12, he's grieving his dad, and he just found a mysterious amulet in the Caribbean Sea that may or may not be calling him to something bigger. Add in a food-flinging bully, a best friend with Jedi-level loyalty, and a beachside vision straight out of a Star Wars prophecy. And you've got a story that's part heart-racing adventure, part heartwarming coming of age, and all kinds of fun. Donn Swaby's debut middle-grade novel, Corey Crumbly and the Lost Amulet, takes readers on a journey across oceans, into family history, and deep inside the middle school experience. It's bold, it's tender, and it's packed with just the right mix of ghosts, games, and growing up. Today on Reading in the Middle, I'm talking to Donn Swaby about where this story came from and what it means to write a new kind of hero, and why lasagna may be the best possible weapon in a cafeteria showdown. So buckle up. This is one adventure you don't want to miss. Hi, Donn. Welcome to Reading in the Middle. How are you?
I'm well, Anisha, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto your wonderful podcast.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have so much to talk about today. But first, before we get into it, can you tell our listeners about your new book coming out for middle graders?
Absolutely. So I am the author of a brand new middle grade novel that is debuting May 29th, and the title is Corey Crumbly and the Lost Amulet.
Now, first of all, he is such a rich and funny layered character. What was the spark that set his story in motion?
Well, for me, the initial, I would say, inspiration comes from my love for the Indiana Jones films that I watched growing up. I happen to be a huge fan of those films. I still remember when I watched the first Indiana Jones film, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was 8 years old. And it had such a huge impact on me because after I saw the film, I remember as a child drawing pictures from scenes that I remembered from the film. And I even was acting them out. I actually want to say this is like my first impulse to actually also be an actor by acting out the scenes that I remembered from the film. And then when that film aired on television in the East, I recorded it on a VCR, which for, I guess, anybody younger than Gen X, they're like, what's a VCR? But that's what we recorded movies and TV programs on. And I actually watched that film every Friday afternoon after school for like a year. It was like my tradition to the point where now to this day, it's the only film that I know every single word of dialogue to. I know the entire film backwards and forwards. But that is what first inspired me to really also get into archaeology, into ancient civilizations. I remember going to the library and getting every book that I could find on ancient Egypt, which is featured in the film. And then also, because there is actually real world mythology that's alluded to in the film, that was also something that I became fascinated by mythology, by different cultures' mythologies. And so that began a lifelong passion about all of those topics.
That movie, I remember seeing that in the theater as a child as well. But the one thing that got me was the part where they opened up the art. And then, yes, and then, you know what happens. So, spoil it for anyone who's never seen it, but that seared in my brain.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful movie.
Yeah.
It is.
It is.
You know, so just the story is rooted in place, right? Corey's home is in Queens and his family's history is in Jamaica. Why was it important for you to write about both?
Well, because as a writer, of course, a lot of what I write tends to be sourced from autobiographical material. And for me, that's in this book certainly the case as well. I myself am from Queens, New York. So I had my character live in Queens, New York. I am also a first generation American. My family on both sides hails from Jamaica. So I am Jamaican. I grew up with Jamaican culture as well as American culture. So I also wanted that represented in the book. So my character, Corey Crumbly, is actually half Jamaican. His dad is from Jamaica. His mother is actually Puerto Rican. She's a New Yorker whose family hails from the island of Puerto Rico. So those are the reasons why those factors are included in the story and why the story is written in that way.
That's really nice because you'll have, young people writing it that have both cultures in their lives. They'll be able to relate to Corey, right? And his adventures. And so in the story, there's grief and joy, right? Side by side. Corey's still missing his dad. He's also having these laugh out loud cousin moments. How did you write the emotional balance for middle grade readers?
Yes, it took a lot of time to find that balance. And because I knew it needed to be done, I knew that what I was trying to do wasn't going to be easy as far as being able to create a story that was both, this sort of action adventure story that this kid gets drawn into. And at the same time, he's also dealing with emotional trauma. He's dealing with the loss of his dad, and which is a huge component of the story as well, in terms of it being the emotional core. And so to do that, I knew that if, for example, I had to make the passing of the father not too immediate to the events of the story. I knew it couldn't be like the week before the story began, for example, because then, of course, the emotions would just be too raw and would dominate. And that would be what the story would mostly be about. And so I placed it about a year and a half. I mean, I wasn't that specific about the exact time, but I placed it within a year and a half. So 16, 17, or 18 months after his dad has passed. That way, he's already gone through stuff, right? He's already gone through stages of grief. He's had, counseling, therapy, counselor at school, and therapy outside of school. And so he's dealt with some things, but there is obviously residual emotions that have not yet been completely processed, which is normal in a grieving situation that can be extended, whether you're a child or an adult. I would imagine for a child of 12 years old that it's actually even more, or can be potentially more overwhelming to be dealing with that. The fact that it's a year and a half gives him a little bit of space because he has been functioning, of course. He has been going to school. He's got to live his life while, he has that. And so as he's being drawn again into the adventure aspect of the story, every once in a while, there is something that happens in the story that triggers that residual, right? That residual emotion of the grief. And he's reminded of, in the background, well, yeah, as exciting and as wonderful as all of this is, I can't exactly run to my dad and say, hey, Dad, guess what's happening? And guess what I found? And all of that. The absence of his father is a huge factor. And as the story progresses, leading to more climactic and more exciting parts of the story, the absence of his father actually becomes greater to the point where he actually does have to deal with it. He is forced because of the situation and the circumstances to actually deal with that residual feeling, which also includes guilt. So without giving away too much in the story, there is also an aspect of guilt surrounding the untimely death of his father, which gets revealed in the story, and which he does eventually have to deal with.
Also, with grief that Corey's going through, there's also that humor. And so can we just take a moment for Trina? Because she's hilarious, fierce and full of heart. Was she inspired by anyone in your life?
Not particularly. I mean, there are other characters that are actually inspired by, in some way, shape, or form, by some real people. For me, Trina was just that sort of precocious, older teenage cousin. Well, you know what? I do have an uncle that my mom's younger brother, much younger than my mom. So when I was Corey's age, he visited us in New York a couple of times from Jamaica. And so he had to have been like in his 20s, early 20s, maybe 22, something like that. To me, it might as well have been, a teenager, because he acted like that. He's very much, he was telling me all the things he was doing. And it just, in retrospect, it was definitely like a sort of teenager bragging about all the cool, exciting things he was doing, and the fashion, the clothes he was wearing and all that. So he made that huge impression on me. So in a way, that Jamaican cousin, Rohan was his name, maybe unconsciously inspired the character of Trina. Oh, I also wanted to add too, regarding your previous question about being able to balance grief and dealing with that, the residual emotional trauma and the action adventure story. And I also want to say that there are elements within the action adventure story that I delightfully discovered actually mirrored Corey's own personal story of grief and dealing with it. In fact, his opposition, his because of course every great action adventure story has a great criminal mastermind, aka nemesis, that Corey faces up against. Within that story, you discover that there is another story that mirrors what Corey is going through. So in a way, I was able to take the theme of loss and grief, and make it so that it incorporated both sides of the story. Yeah, Corey's personal story, dealing with his dad and the loss of his dad, and then you also have him dealing with this bigger story, facing a nemesis who also has a similar story regarding loss.
And then there's the amulet, this mysterious object that seems to unlock something much bigger than anything else. What does that mean to Corey?
So the Taino amulet that you referred to is the amulet that he finds in coral reef off the coast of Jamaica. And so it's the very beginning of the book. He's in Jamaica, family reunion. So that's the setup. That's the beginning. Initially, he doesn't know what to make of it, but he does know that it's special. He can tell that it's ancient, it's old. And yeah, it's the Tainos are the indigenous people that inhabit the Caribbean islands. They are still here. They're still around. There is these false notion that I grew up with, we all, I think, grew up with, and that I think has persisted for centuries, that all the Tainos, the indigenous in the Caribbean, were wiped out either by disease or just being killed off, and that's actually not true. But the Tainos, in either case, they are the people who lived there. So this is an amulet that he finds that was made by the indigenous, that he discovers has magical powers, which come in very handy for him back at school, in his middle grade school in Queens, New York. So the amulet also is haunted in several ways, more ways than one. So without giving away too much about what it is, it's just something that, yes, he's never dealt with before. And in fact, it magically opens up a whole new world to him, and he learns about the amulet's past. He learns how the amulet was made, and he gets a personal glimpse into the actual, and I wanted to allude to the Spanish conquest of the Caribbean, going back in time and sort of in painting that picture. And that's how he discovers the amulet's origins, as well as how the amulet came to be centuries later, wedged in a coral reef off the coast of Jamaica. And he finds out why, and also why he, in particular, was destined.
So Donn, Corey's mom, she always looks out for him, even when strict. What rules do grown-ups have that inspired you to write her like that, and sometimes drive Corey a little bonkers, but although it's coming from a good place, that he knows that? What was that inspired you to write Corey's mom?
Well, Corey's mom is, in a way, fashioned in the mold of my mother, in that way of her. She's a smart woman. She is a teacher. She really, really loves Corey, of course. She has been dealing with the loss of her husband, Corey's dad, as well, in her own way. And of course, the story is, Corey's story. So we do see his mother at times, and when they do interact, on some level, there is a sort of typical, adolescent child mother relationship, making sure you do your homework, making sure, if there's any problems at school. But of course, there's an extra thing of, okay, and is this still related to your dad? The reason that it's a year and a half later where because there is no, okay, this happened just, this past month or so, and it's just still fresh. It's more like, well, I don't know now. I think she, I wrote her in a place where she's not sure of where her son is, and perhaps even has a little bit of reticence in terms of broaching that question, because she knows, okay, he had a negative thing at school where teachers asking him how he is, and he's just like, I'm done with it. I'm done being asked how I am for the last, year and a half, a type of thing. So she's not sure where to back off in terms of that, to inquire. And of course, she's hoping that this, 18 months or so has passed that he's okay, and that he's doing okay. Now, in terms of her love, she's just a typical mom in that way. In terms of, when I say typical, I don't mean to demean that. In fact, I mean to elevate that. And by that, I mean to quote one of my favorite musicals, Passing Strange, written by Stu, which if you've never seen, there's a YouTube version produced by Spike Lee, which I strongly recommend because it's my all-time favorite musical. He sings at one point, "Your mother's love might seem insane. That's because she really knows everything." And there's something about that I think applies to my characters, to Corey's mom, who is, and again, she's this woman who, she's a Puerto Rican, third generation American Puerto Rican, grew up in the Bronx in New York, and, she is a teacher. So she tries to, well, Corey anyway complains that she lectures him, a lot. And in fact, we do get a little bit of that. We see a few examples of that. Although at the same time, Corey is 12 years old. And as we know, children do tend to exaggerate. In reference to his mom, I tend to think he's being that typical adolescent. Oh, she's always on my case. She's always, when in fact, I think really what we see is someone who at the beginning, I think, is cautious around him, because I think she's not quite sure 100% where he's at. So when things happen at school that she finds out about, it's like, oh no, okay, so things are not 100% okay yet. Okay, well, and she's not sure. So yeah, so I think I just drew on, I think, a sort of an idea of, okay, a mother who fully loves her son, who's a real mom, who has that real mom love, but how does it show up? And in this case, it's real mom love. It just shows up as maybe over protectiveness, as over, like, the cautiousness.
And that's
behind this amulet.
Thank you, Donn. Now I'm going to get to this specific kind of middle grade villain, the Troy, urgent, intimidating, and just petty enough to feel too real. How did you develop his character?
LaTroy Gillette. So LaTroy Gillette starts off anyway as the typical bully, although of course he quickly shows that he's atypical, right? He's number one, he's not a big, imposing guy. He's actually short. He's actually the shortest kid in 7th grade in his and Corey's grade. He is also, even though he's the shortest kid, he's like the all-star basketball player on the middle grade team. And he has a bit of a Napoleon complex. And so he picks on the kids that are bigger than him, like Corey. He's actually inspired in part by a kid that I did go to high school with. And this kid was the shortest kid in the grade. And he also was a bit of a bully. He would pick on people. And in fact, I do remember the day that I saw him. He had a fight with a friend of mine who was actually one of the biggest kids in the grade, really big, imposing kid. And let's just say that, it got physical. And my bigger friend was like basically down on the floor, and the smaller kid had given him a bloody nose. So yeah, I didn't want to go that far in terms of necessarily any violence, but I did want LaTroy to be imposing and menacing. And so the way I did that is again, having him be very confrontational, but verbally so. And that's when you realize he's atypical. He's not the typical bully. He's as smart as Corey. Corey's a straight A kid. LaTroy's a straight A kid. They're in some of the same classes, and so he's a star athlete. He's a gets A's, and yet he's a bully. So there's something going on there. And in the story, I explore why, in fact, he's bullying Corey, and you find out, the reason. You find out why he has particularly targeted this one kid. And in fact, that in and of itself is also related to my own personal experience in high school, where in my freshman year, there was this one kid in my class that for whatever reason, I just didn't like. And I didn't know why, except there was something about him. And so I would have a couple of times, I remember, some arguments or would have, a confrontation with him. And that happened maybe twice. And I was like, oh, I just can't stand that kid. And it wasn't until having freshman year in my high school would have like counseling sessions with seniors to see how the freshmen were doing in their first year. And this one senior said, describe this guy, describe this. So, I described, this other kid. And he said, well, how would you describe yourself? And so I described myself. And he said, do you realize that you and this other kid have similarities? You're both musicians. You're both pretty smart. You're both and da, da, da. He's like, is it possible that there's something within yourself that maybe you're not accepting that you see in him that you, and therefore, you don't like it in him as well. And that's the reason why you don't, because he's reminding you of something in yourself that you maybe don't like. That blew my mind. That was one of the first really deep introspective moments in my life, because that really forced me for the first time in my life to stop and to think about, why I was saying and doing the things that I was doing, and once I realized he was right, I was like, wow. And then, ironically, I became good friends with that guy. And in fact, my very first high school band, we actually formed a high school band.
That's wonderful. And see, and that happened in high school. Can you imagine what if you hadn't had that opportunity to talk to that counselor? You were just going on not liking him, and then you probably just wouldn't have formed that band, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, you mentioned that there's no violence in the book, but I recall a food fight.
Well, yes. And when I said violence, I meant in the sense
No, I was just kidding.
I just meant on the part of LaTroy's character, because there are actually, and by that I actually mean, let me take that back. So, there is violence as far as, for example, there is, the scene, there's a confrontation with the bully, character gets chased, Corey gets chased, and there is an attempt for bullies to beat up Corey, for example. I won't share, just to keep it a bit of a surprise, in case people do want to read the book, as to how that goes down and what happens. But yes, we don't want to spoil it, but yes, something really cool does happen in those moments. So there is the threat of violence. There's definitely the threat of violence that does happen, and people try to enact violence, of course. And then yes, there is a food fight. There is definitely the food fight, which was a lot of fun to write. And yeah.
No, I was just being silly because because bloody nose from your real life experience, and then there's that situation in the story.
Right, being pegged in the face with food is probably less dangerous than being punched in the face. So yeah, I would, or it depends. It depends on how fast that food is flying across the room.
That's true. That's absolutely true, especially if it's like a meatball in there. So you got. So. Corey's connection to video games. So this is where I'm totally showing my age, but Pac-Man is more than a hobby. It's emotional and tied to memories of his dad. I love that because I remember growing up playing Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Centipede. The young people, they're so accustomed to playing video games at home, they'll never know. I mean, playing video games, everyone does that, but I remember just going to the arcade and playing. Was gaming a big part of your childhood as well?
Well, interestingly enough, actually do remember, of course, going to the arcade, like after school sometimes in a junior high. I do remember there was a local place that had several arcade machines, including a Pac-Man. So like a pizza shop, I think, and me and some friends would go and play. So that was my first earliest memories of arcade games. And I love them, of course, and I grew up in the 80s, the early 80s. So Pac-Man was the big one, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders, Galaga, all those awesome, wonderful games, right? And so I definitely wanted to bring back that nostalgia. For me, though, interestingly enough, the biggest memory that I have as a kid was when my dad got the first home game system, which I know there was one by ColecoVision, but of course, I'm referring to Atari. Atari was, I think, the first mainstream brand that, and I still remember the day my dad came home with it. My brother and I were so excited. He opens up the box and we're setting it all up and plugging in all the wires. Then we're like, wait, where's the game? Wait, there's no game? It doesn't come with the game. My dad was so upset. He's like, I actually have to go out and buy the game separately. He thought it came with the game. So he went back out to the store and he brought back Pac-Man, and the rest is history.
That's a good story. I love that because, well, I could go into Atari 2600 and what it looked like as opposed to the arcade game and that, but no, that's going back to your story, there's this moment where Corey is waiting for a sign from his father. It's so tender. What do you hope young readers take away from the idea of looking for signs and learning to trust yourself?
Great question. So I guess what I would love for readers to come away with in reading that part of the story is to learn that we have to learn to trust ourselves, and we have to learn to trust what we experience. And sometimes traumas and certain things will prevent us from trusting ourselves. We doubt, but we have to be able to find a way to trust ourselves. So that's part of Corey's journey in the book. And so, it's been over a year since his father's passed, and he, as I said, he talks about wanting to find or see a sign because his therapist said, hey, you have dreams, there's signs, his mom even says, signs from your dad, I look for them, and that's a source of comfort for her. And so Corey wants the same thing, right? He was like, well, Mom says, I should look for a sign from my dad, ask God first, to have your dad send you a sign. So Corey, in his heart and aloud, as I write in the book, he asks for a sign, and, doesn't see anything. And when I say doesn't see anything, I think he's at a place even where he may not be able to. He's not able yet to really see something. And so he's doubting whatever he does see. And so he's thinking of like the typical signs, right? Like, you heard a bird on a windowsill, or, a street light coming on, as you're passing under it, something like that. And that's what he's waiting for. And it sounds stereotypical, but he's a kid. And so he's just like, yeah, I just want something that lets me know officially that I've not lost my dad completely. That's really what we're getting to. It's this thing of, who am I after my dad? This big hole in my life that he occupied. How does that affect me? My identity? How do I see myself? And yeah, that's a huge thing. And that's it gets resolved where by the end he comes to that place. And it's beautiful how he gets there. But as far as getting to that place of being able to finally trust yourself and what you feel inside, and then also once you're in that place, ironically, that's when you see the sign. That's when when he's finally able to deal with that guilt and all those things that he had inside of him. That is what then allows clears this space for him to be able to finally see and receive a sign, which I actually received myself. So just to let you know too, a full disclosure. So when I started writing this book, my father was alive, and within maybe the first 2 years of working on this book, Corey was living with his mom. She was a single mom, and he didn't have a father in the book. His grandmother had passed, but he didn't have a father, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why I didn't write a dad in there. And then there was a point where I realized it's because it's not his grandmother who passed; it's his dad. I mean, literally, that was a thought that came to me one day. And then, long story short, my own father, actually got sick and then passed away. And as I said, within those first several years, so by the third, fourth year of the book, my father's passed. And what I found out is I was basically working through my own pain and my own grief and my own loss through my story. And I realized I was relating 100% to my character because I was literally going through what I was writing my character having had gone through. Granted, of course, I was an adult when it happened. So I probably, well, I'd like to say, as an adult, I was probably just a little bit more together and with it. No. I was still just as floored and the absolute depths of grief when I lost my dad. And I too, in fact, had residual guilt regarding, things that had happened with my dad that I regretted, conversations. Oh, I wish I'd never said that thing that one time, and, things like that, that it really took a long time to get over it or get through and work through, which I did, and I had to for my own sake, for my own peace, inner peace. And so, yes, for Corey in the story, I really wanted to make sure that whole journey, emotional inner journey, was mapped out for him so that he could arrive at that same place that I eventually did.
It was so.
And not to cut you off, and please hold your thought. I just also wanted to say about signs. So the last thing I was going to say is, and I kid you not, we came home from my father's funeral, which is in Florida. And I went to the room where I usually stay when I stayed with my parents. And I sat on the bed and I looked out the window and a bird came and sat on the fence. And that bird was a cardinal. My father's favorite bird is a cardinal. And that bird sat there for at least 2 or 3 minutes. I knew in my heart that bird was from my dad. That in some way that was my dad. I knew that.
It's a sign.
So it was most definitely a sign. And every time I think about it, I get very emotional because it was so real.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And that's what makes your story so relatable and touching and tender, as I mentioned before, because it's experiences that we all go through, losing a loved one, going through those stages of grief that we go through in our minds, but we have to also forgive ourselves and give us time to be able to accept whatever thoughts that we may have. And with Corey Crumbly, you created such a wonderful character and a story that touched so many young people's lives. I want to have a question to ask you for our listeners. Will we see more of Corey Crumbly? More stories coming from the series? Are there more in the future?
I hope so. I would love to see Corey in another adventure in the same way that we have many Indiana Jones films and in that regard. So yes, I would love to see him definitely go on some more adventures. There's plenty of world mythology out there. And also I just wanted to say this as well, that my book does explore and introduces Taino mythology and in fact Amazonian mythology too. And I won't explain how, but yeah, when you read the book, you'll see how all that stuff comes into play. And yet, my book is still fiction. It is still a fictional story, even though it is inspired in some sense by real world mythology and culture. In this case, the Taino indigenous people of the Caribbean. And in the back of my book, I list some resources for people who want to learn more about actual Taino culture and mythology and the people. Because as I said before, the Tainos are thriving. They are alive and well. Many organizations right now that are conducting ceremonies, that are teaching the sacred ceremonies and customs and traditions to the younger generations and inviting people to participate and take part. So, which I find so wonderful. So I definitely always encourage people to learn about the real stuff that inspired the fictional story. And yes, even though we've been talking about the grief and all of that, I just wanted to say that, the action adventure aspect is just as large in this book too. So, it's not all one big inner emotional roller coaster. There's also plenty of chasing, running. There are some explosions. There's quaking. There are booby traps. Yeah. So, it definitely, and then some really magical, amazing things that happen. There's a lot of magic in this story. so it's definitely very visceral in that way. And hopefully, but there should be plenty of places where you're at the, edge of your seat going, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? I hope that's how you feel when you are reading the book.
It's very balanced. It has everything. It has action and adventure. Like you mentioned, it's like an Indiana Jones roller coaster ride, but you also have, it's full circle, right? It has emotion. It has humor. It does have thrills, chases. And so if you are ready for something like that, listeners, you're going to love Corey Crumbly and the Lost Amulet. Where can they find your book, and when is it coming out?
So it comes out May 29th, and it is available online at many places. Amazon USA, Amazon UK, Stones.org is another one, and barnesandnoble.com. In some bookstores as well. Got Barnes and Noble bookstore, physical copies, and some other bookstores. I and the publisher, Tiny Tree Children's Books, are actively getting my book out there. And I also wanted to just allude to, as well in the story to the fact that yes, we talked about the bully in the story. But there's also a criminal mastermind, a character that I love, actually. And I don't want to give too much away about him in the story and how he factors in. But because he's separate from LaTroy, and it's beautiful, as you alluded to, the relationship between Corey and the bully LaTroy, and how that actually changes, actually evolves in an interesting way. But the nemesis, this character, I love because what's interesting about bad guys, and for example, let me go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that is where I actually got the inspiration for this character. Renee Belloc is a character who's Indiana Jones's nemesis, and he's also an archaeologist, and he's every bit as smart and cunning and, on it as Indy. In fact, even more so, more clever in a lot of ways. And there's a brilliant scene where they're in a cafe and he says, I'm a shadowy reflection of you. It would only take a nudge to make you like me, to push you out of the light. As I said, remember, I got all those lines, the entire script in my head, right? So, but what I love about it is he's telling the truth about him and his relationship to the hero. The supposed hero is actually a shadowy figure, in my opinion. And if you recall, the female character, Corey's friend, if you will, Rebecca, in the story, the middle grade student, how she talks about how her father does film analysis, helps her break down movies. And so she's broken down for the Indiana Jones films. So she tells Corey, oh yeah, Indiana Jones is not a hero until, the third act of the film. Up until then, he's kind of almost a bad guy. I mean, he shoots people indiscriminately. He abandons the woman he supposedly loves several times in pursuit of this artifact, and he's kind of shady, which is actually true. And so with my story, this nemesis, this criminal mastermind is also in that way, but in the way that he speaks, some of the things that he says are actually truthful. The best villains are the ones that half the time they're saying something where you're nodding your head. Like, think about that. No, seriously. The best villains are the ones that make you stop and think for a moment. Another, in fact, two villains that I also modeled this one off of would be Thanos from the Marvel Universe and Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker from the Star Wars series. In that, both of those characters do not see themselves as evil. And to be true, to be honest, no one sees themselves that way. As human beings, it's our wonderful gift of being able to rationalize anything we say or do.
Yeah.
So in that same way, my nemesis rationalizes what he believes and what he does. In the same way that Thanos and Anakin, they believe that what they are doing is for the better, is for the good, is for the good of all. They sincerely, truly, 100% believe that what they are doing is for the betterment of all. They do not see their flaw, their own character flaw, right, if you will, which prevents them from having hubris, which prevents them from seeing their outrageous ego, and that, in fact, what they're doing is ego-driven, and that it's actually a personal thing because of a wound. because of an unhealed wound. See, now we're going full circle, going back to, with Corey's story and how it mirrors Corey's story, as I said earlier, is dealing with his own residual grief and loss. And then you find out that the nemesis also has this story that gets revealed in the, and you see a mirroring happening, which I loved when I discovered it as the writers. I love that character because, as I said, it's almost the character that you want to like. You want to like some aspects of him, and you certainly empathize. For me, I know I felt for him. I felt for this quote unquote bad guy. He's the bad guy of the story, and yet I feel for him certainly. And I stop and I think about some of the things he says, as does Corey. And yet, like Thanos and like Anakin Skywalker, it was just a little thing there that's just not right. That's just a little off. That leads their whole vision to be off, which they don't see.
I like that. That's really like, I'm already, that's, you hear that, readers, you got to pick that up, because it's so, that's one thing I loved about, many things I loved about the story, but just it's so layered, it's very layered, it's complex, but it's full of so many things that you may miss. It's like a movie. It's literally like a movie, and you have to read it again, right? So that's the one thing that I highly recommend everyone picking up. And so now, drum roll please, Donn, we have our fire lightning round. Are you ready for the fun, quick questions? And you give me your quick answers too. You ready?
Absolutely. Here
we go. Do it. Favorite video game growing up?
Donkey Kong.
One Jamaican dish you could eat every day?
Curry goat.
If you could time travel to one historical site, where would you go?
The building of the Great Pyramid.
Rita or Corey, who would win a rematch on that dusty old Nintendo?
Easy. That would be Corey. Katrina is just a little too rusty.
What's one?
Her skills are a little too rusty.
Oh, sometimes you gotta practice. So you gotta practice, get those skills. What's one book you wish you could hand your middle school self?
So any book, right? That would be probably in my recent life. I think the book that has most impacted me, that I actually would share it with my younger self, is a book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And this is a book where this guy wrote about how, as a very young man, he was able to, I didn't know a small part from his parents, but to have I don't say trauma-free upbringing, but it was emotionally balanced. He was in a very loving, caring family. He spiritually awakened very early in his life. So by the time he's, late teens, 20s, he's meditating daily. He just is in a place that I know I wasn't at, and I didn't discover a lot of these things until later in my life, in the last maybe 20 years or so. And so even though I still, and the idea of the book is that he's accepting of everything that comes into his life. And he believes that if you are accepting of what comes into your life, then it's having the faith that knowing that what comes into your life is there to teach you a lesson, no matter what it is, positive or negative. And if you allow those things and accept those things and learn and evolve, that your life will become, the reality of it will be way beyond anything you could have possibly imagined for yourself. And which I love, this idea of, again, it's a version of letting go, letting God, having faith in that bigger, it doesn't have to be necessarily religious. I mean, for me, it is spiritual, this idea of just letting go and accepting. And it doesn't mean, of course, that you accept abuse or you accept, someone hurting you emotionally or physically. It's certainly not. But just in terms of understanding to accept the things that are happening, that there's a reason for those things happening, and there's something for you to learn. So I know, that would definitely be something that I would give my younger self. I don't know if he'd be able to get it at that young age. He still might have to wait 5 or 10 years and then read it again and be like, that's what this book is about. Mm-hmm. But if I could, I would totally give my younger self that book.
Yeah, nice. My mother she would always tell me when I was younger, and still does to this day, that everything happens for a reason. There's sometimes when I'm like, oh, why is this going on? Why is this happening? Even when I was in school, I didn't get into the school I wanted to get into. And it's like, it happens for a reason. And then you look back on things and you're like, you know what? This is true. So yes, if giving yourself that book, your middle grade self, that book, I know would enlighten you and help you. And then you wouldn't have to like go through 20 something years and, yes, you'd already be there.
Young adulthood would have been smoother. Yeah, I think it would maybe a few less learning experiences. Let's say let's call them. So yeah, for sure. Oh, hey, I also wanted to make a quick announcement on your podcast, if I may, for your listeners, to stay tuned. And whether I will be sharing this on my social media, and I'll also, if you'd like, Anisha, I'll definitely send you a link because I'm getting made at this very moment a book trailer, and it is going to be unlike any book trailer you've ever seen or anyone's ever seen. It's cutting edge technology. It's going to look amazing. I cannot wait for people to see it. And it looks like a movie. It's going to be amazing.
Like Indiana Jones, snakes.
Yes.
Balls rolling. What was that? You've seen the movie a million times. What was that thing?
Of course, right? The big boulder that's going down through the tunnel, and that type of so it's going to have that type of energy, that type of excitement.
Melting faces.
As you said, it's cinematic, very cinematic. Like the story is also very cinematic. And from your lips to God's ears, as they say, would I love for Corey Crumbly to see the big screen one day? Of course I would. Are you kidding? Or even the small screen, TV film as well. But yeah, I can definitely see a live action version.
That would be great. That would be awesome. I mean, I'm looking to see sequel to Corey Crumbly, so I'm waiting for that. I know right now you just want the book to come out, be published May 29th, but still, you can't have us hanging. You can't leave us hanging like that.
Yes, we will definitely see. I'd like us to see more of Corey Crumbly. He definitely has some more adventures to experience, for sure.
I can't wait. And listeners, please go out and get the order. Oh, that's another thing. Can our listeners find you on your website? I know they can find you on Instagram and Facebook.
Yes. So, so my Instagram, my Instagram is my name, Donn _Swaby. So DONN _Swaby at I'm sorry, it's not an email. It's Donn _Swaby. For my Facebook, I believe it's just my name, Donn Swaby. Yeah, those are the two that I use the most. I am on Twitter, although not as much. And my website is actually Donn Swaby. It's a Wix site, so WIXSITE. So it's wixsite.com/Donn Writes, DONNWRITES. There you will find all my books, because I actually have several other books as well, picture books that have been published. I do author visits as well, and which I love. I love visiting schools and talking to kids about writing and about being inspired, how to stoke your curiosity and fuel your imagination, and how you can write your own stories. I empower them to basically become authors as kids in the same way that I was. I mean, by the time I was 12 years old, and I tell them this, I say, I'm a multi-genre writer. I love writing for kids. I do write across the board. By the time I was 12, I had written poetry. I had a short Halloween short story that I got to read over the PA because it won the scary Halloween contest. I wrote a one-act play in the 7th grade about Sandra Day O'Connor, the Supreme Court Justice, the first female Supreme Court Justice. I made a comic book that I still have to this day with like 6 or 7 different comic strips that I came up with the stories for and made the whole comic and the boxes and drew them and lettered them. And then I also wrote my own book. The Young Authors Festival, my 8th grade, is when we actually created a story, wrote the story, and printed it out through our images, our illustrations on the book. They created a cover, and I was a finalist for that. So So I tell people, since I was 12 years old, I mean, I have been a multi-genre writer and writing all kinds of stuff and have definitely not stopped. But I love writing middle grade. As I said, this is my first middle grade novel. I do have other stories. There is another story, for example, I'm very excited about. It's not a Corey Crumbly story, but it is another kid, just as amazing of a story, which I'm excited eventually to one day share with you guys. So stay tuned for more Corey Crumbly and more other middle grade adventure stories from Donn Swaby.
So we will keep our listeners posted on that and make sure that we get those links up on our website. So on our website and on our Instagram page, so they'll be able to reach out and also let you know that how much they are enjoying your book when it comes out in May. Donn, this was wonderful.
Please do. Please have anybody who wants to reach out to me. I'm very accessible. So I would love to hear from you if you have read the book. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is wonderful, Donn. I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Reading in the Middle episode. This was a wonderful conversation. Just wonderful. I had so much fun, and I hope you did too, because this was so much just enjoyment, especially taking me back to Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so now we have Raiders of the Lost Ark Jr. with Corey Crumbly. But similar, not the same. It's not, you know what I mean. It's just an homage, so to speak.
Absolutely. I as I'm proud to say, as I have said before, and actually made a video about this as well, but that I'm proud to say that my story actually incorporates every major element in all 5 Indiana Jones films, all of them. Every single theme or element explored in those, like real world mythology, mysterious magical artifact, very smart criminal mastermind nemesis, very tough, spunky female co-lead, with a cool, with the helpful sidekick friend, and the father and son thing, as we saw Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade dealing with Indy and his dad. So we've got Corey dealing with memories of his dad. So there's a Temple of Doom. That's all I will say. Temple of Doom, you say?
Yeah,
you got to read it to learn more about what that is. And so with every film, I have actually incorporated every single element or aspect.
But you need a theme, like a theme song or theme instrumental soundtrack to your book. Now you need that,
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. I'm a big fan of music, and it's funny that you say that because, the Indiana Jones films, just like several other film series, usually cannot be thought of without thinking of the music, because we were blessed to be living in a generation, a day and age where we have someone like John Williams, who I consider one of the greatest modern composers, certainly one of the most greatest cinematic composer, where his music is so integral to those films, right? That you can't think of Star Wars without hearing, the theme song. You can't think of, Superman, Christopher Reeve, without, hearing the Superman theme. You can't think of, Indiana Jones without hearing dun 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 dun. You just can't. You hear those melodies when you think of those films. And yes, 100% what you just said. I love it. And yes, when I see Corey Crumbly eventually making the screen, or the small screen or the big screen, he will have an awesome soundtrack or theme song. He'll definitely have an amazing theme song. So stay tuned for that.
Oh wow! I'm going to again. Thank you again for being on this podcast. We enjoy having you on here, and we look forward to more books from you, whether that's picture books, middle grade books, or soundtracks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show and for allowing me to share my story with your listenership. Yeah, I had a great time. I had an awesome time. A lot of fun.
That was Donn Swaby, author of Corey Crumbly and the Lost Amulet, a story that reminds us that the greatest adventures aren't always about treasure or travel. Sometimes they're about healing, family, and finding the courage to follow the signs, even when they're a little blurry. Whether it's dodging jellyfish, taking on bullies, or chasing clues through history, Corey shows us what it means to be brave in the face of the unknown and still make it home in time for a video game rematch. If you're looking for a book that blends mystery, humor, cultural discovery, and a whole lot of heart, Corey Crumbly and the Lost Amulet belongs on your shelf, or better yet, in your backpack. I'm Anisha Jeffries, and this is Reading in the Middle. Thanks so much for listening, and remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can find us on all podcast platforms. And just remember that you don't need an ancient artifact or a galaxy far, far away to find adventure. Sometimes it's right where you are. Oh, also, don't forget, Donn's book comes out May 29th. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it everywhere books are sold. So don't forget to get your copy. You don't want to miss that. Bye.